Welcome everyone to tonight's lecture. I'm Sadie Fair. I am the director of the Kittitas County Historical Museum, and I'm pleased to see everyone attend tonight. I'm also pleased to introduce Ida Nason Aronica. He is our special speaker for tonight, as well as quite the man. His family history is so important to the Valley. I don't want to go into it because I know he'll do a much better job about telling his history than I could ever. But we're pleased to have him here and to have him previously donate his family's collection to the museum to preserve it for future generations. So a little bit about Ellen. He graduated at Ellensburg High School and went into the U.S. Army in 1966, served in Vietnam through 68, and then came back to serve a 30-year career with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So I'm pleased to welcome him, and I hope you will as well.
They asked me to speak because I don't consider myself a very good speaker. But I noticed the crowd is bigger and it makes me even more nervous. One of the people I was a friend of mine, he come up to me and he says, "Are you prepared?" And I told him, "No, wouldn't you know it? On the one night that I should be the most prepared, I'm probably the ill prepared because I'm still trying to find stuff from that Taylor Ridge fire from 2 years ago when everybody helped me move out, and I was looking for material and stuff that I usually use, and I have no idea. I know it's been brought back and put in boxes because everybody helped pack all of my mom's stuff out in different places, and I haven't been able to locate some of that stuff. I know it's there, I just haven't had time to go back through and sort it back out. But once again, my name is Ida Naronica, is my name, is my Christian name, I guess, that. But my Indian name is Ahutskahowny. And you know, when I was younger, I was always wanting an Indian name. When I was growing up, I grew up during the time of the 40s, 47 and stuff was there, and that kind of wasn't cool to be Indian. And plus that, it wasn't even cool to be half Indian. It was considered a breed. The Indians didn't claim you, and the white guys didn't claim you, so you was kind of in the middle. There's a lot of that today now. There's a lot of the full bloods, they've kind of passed on, and so there's a lot more breeds, so I don't feel so bad. But I always wanted an Indian name, but all the Indian names you heard about when you was growing up, when I was growing up and going to school, the only thing you heard about was the Sioux tribe and all those tribes on that Midwest. All the stuff in skirmish there, but you didn't hear anything about the different bands or Indians that were located in this area. And so I was always saying, well, they say they're Indian, what makes them different than us? But I was always intrigued with those Indian names back there. You know, they had like some of those names you heard, read about in history. But I always wanted an Indian name that I could pronounce, and I wanted something like Screaming Eagle or something. Something really good. Well, actually my Indian name is really good. Ahutskahowny was my grandfather's name. And my grandfather come out of the Palouse country. He was a Palouse Indian. And married at my mother's memorial, married Jim, who was there. She gave me my grandfather's name at that time out of the ranch. And Ahutskahowny means someone who drops things off along the way. And when my grandfather was young and he traveled around, he used to travel and visit his relatives and different people, and when he went to different places, he always went with some kind of either roots or berries or fish or something like that, and he would take it and drop it off. Little did I know, that's what my mother taught me from the time I was young. No matter where we was going, no matter how long it took, you always stopped off and visited your family, whether they were cousins or distant cousins, aunts, uncles, or whatever it was. She says, you're never in too big a hurry that you can't stop long enough to have a cup of coffee with them. And back in those days, it wasn't only just Indian family. I think when you traveled around and went to people's homes, the first thing they wanted to do is either offer you a cup of coffee, and they used to bring snacks out, pretty soon the cookies, pretty soon, before you left, you usually had a full meal and then some. But she would make stuff, says, well, you're going down to Top Nason, Yakima, I want you to run over to so-and-so's place or something like that. But Mary Jim was in the nursing home in Wapto, and I used to always run down there. This time of year, I knew that she liked roots and stuff, and so I'd always dig her some roots and get some stuff. And if I caught some fresh salmon, I have a couple cousins back there that showed up. They're going to make sure I tell the stories right. Yes, I haven't been careful. Some of them, I used to give their sister salmon, and they'd help me dry it. And I would take Mary Jim some dried salmon or roots, and that's where she says, oh, you're just like your grandpa. Every time you come and see me, you're always bringing me something and dropping it off. So she gave me that name. I guess to give you a little bit more family, or to give you my family history, my mother was Ida Nason. Her maiden name was Ida Joseph. And she was actually born in Wenatchee. She was a Wenatchee Indian. She was born in Kashmir up in what they call Nahum Canyon. It's just before you get into Kashmir there, you take that left and it goes up. The canyon's off to your north of the freeway there, and you go up there. And at that time, my grandmother was living up there, and that's where Mom was born at. My grandmother, on my mom's side, she was actually a Snoqualmie. She was born, her dad was at Snoqualmie Falls. And that's where our part of that side of the family come from. They lived there at Falls City. They had their allotments at Falls City, and Grandpa had his allotment right there at the falls where that interpretive center is at. Mom took me down there. When we walked down to that trail down to the falls right at the bottom there, she took me down there when I was younger and showed me where Grandpa had his sweat house and stuff, because he'd do his sweat and he'd go jump into the pool underneath the falls. That's where that side of the family came from. Mom, when she was a little girl, she was on the reservation there on the Icicle River. There was actually a reservation there at the Icicle, what is now right there, like where the fish hatchery was conflict. That was supposed to be our reservation. And of course, when Governor Stevens was trying to run that railroad through, he had some government surveyors come in, and he moved the boundaries on that reservation, and he moved those boundaries so that the reservation was more up towards Lake Wenatchee. And at that time, the chief of the Wenatchee Post, John Parnell, said, no, we're not going to go up to Lake Wenatchee, because that's not our home ground. Our home ground is the confluence of the Icicle River and Wenatchee. Because up Lake Wenatchee, the winters get too hard, get too rough. We want to be where the food and stuff is at, and that was at the confluences of the Icicle River. But when they did away with that reservation, at that time is when they took our family, and that's when my mother was a little girl, and they split our family. When they split that family, they took half of them to the Caldwell Reservation, and half of them were taken to the Yakima Reservation, or here. My mother was brought into the Kittitas Valley, and the only reason she got to stay here is she had an aunt that lived on the lower river bottom road down. Anybody been down in there? She had an allotment down there. You got to go through Atchison's place to get clear to it. At that time, that Yakima River was more to the east than it is now. And because of the dikes and stuff, it's pushed that river to the west more than what it used to be. But that allotment that she had down there was a 160-acre allotment. Well, when they start building the dikes in there, the river, they saved some places from flooding, but that river cut through that allotment, and it split the allotment so it's on both sides of the river. And part of that allotment somehow got taken out and wound up over on what would be the Mike Moore place for those of you that are around. it's over on his piece, and I still have the piece of allotment on the west side. And that aunt and uncle were up in years, and they had, her uncle had real bad arthritis, so bad that he was crippled up, and they had to pick him up and carry him, and he was getting up in years. So my grandma says, "You're going to stay here and take care of your uncle," to my mother. And so she stayed there with her aunt and uncle, and at that time she even went, and by then she was in her teenage years, she said, and she went out to Damon school but she said she was all older than those other kids, and school didn't interest her. So she just took care of her aunt and uncle, and then she would ride at that time across the valley over to Cook Creek. And at that time Grandma had an allotment in Cook, over at Cook Creek. In fact, any of you been up over there, you'll still see the little house is still sitting there, and Grandpa's old cellar there. But when Grandpa and Grandma passed away, we lost those allotments. Those allotments went to some families we didn't even know who they were. They claimed they were the closest relatives of Grandpa, and we didn't know anybody. And we basically lost those allotments along with some other allotments that Grandma had. But anyway, Mom, when she was doing that, was riding back and forth to see her mother, and she used to clean houses for different early settlers at that time, and she had a lot of houses over on that side. It seemed like a lot of people on this side hired her. She said, Mom always used to tell me, I said, well, how come we didn't clean houses over on that side? It was closer. She said, well, the people over there didn't really want to hire me because I was Indian, and she said they were a little bit more, I guess, to be politically correct, she said I wasn't good enough to clean their house. But the people over on this side of the valley, she said, they liked Indians, some of them did, and they took us in, so I cleaned their houses. And a lot of the old timers that lived on this side, I think Keith Esslinger's family was over on that side, on the northeast side there. That's where, we always said that's where all the rednecks live. But we always had fun. But we lived over on that side. Mom, but she'd travel over to see her grandmother in Cook Canyon. And in doing so, along the way when she was riding back, that was before they had a lot of fencing in. Before they started fencing and cutting in people, they hadn't really quite settled it. She could ride across country as a crow fly. As they started putting fences and roads in, and it made that trip longer. You couldn't just take a straight shot from down there across. She met a young man by the name of, his name was actually Johnny SoHappy, but he took the Nason name, John Nason. And the reason he did is his grandfather, his grandfather, Charlie Nason, raised him. Because his mother, Laura SoHappy, passed away giving birth to him. George SoHappy was his father. He married Laura Nason, and she became a SoHappy. That's how we got tied in with the Wanapum band. My mother married into the Wanapums. So you had the Snoqualmies, you had the Wanapums, and you had the Wenatchee-pums. And those were 4 bands. And what people don't understand is, a long time ago, before they started putting reservation stuff together, these bands, the Kittitas band, there was a Yakima, but they took 13 of these different bands to make what they call the Yakima Nation today. And the Yakima Nation consists of 13 bands. And theoretically, when you have like 13 councilmen and stuff, the way I understood it was told when I was growing up was you had one councilman represent each one of the bands. And supposedly each councilman would go and speak for the needs of that band, for whatever you had for your needs. You'd go talk to that person, and he kind of like the deal, but you know, that don't work all the time. I can tell you right now, sometimes Indian politics is worse than fight phone. But we had a good team. My cousin always said. But that's how these bands got together. And the bands were different. But the bands, the Kittitas band, the Wanapum band, and even the Wenatchee band, and stuff from like Mom and told them, they weren't warring tribes. They were more on the religious, and they had their Washington religion, or like the Waterpums have your religion over there. Mom said they didn't want to fight. In fact, it was an interesting fight. These people wanted to welcome the people that came in, but this is one thing that Mom was always trying. To me, Mom was in my eyes, was the first Martin Luther King. She had a vision. She wanted whites and everybody to get together, and so she said, "You got to go tell the story, and tell the story of the Kittitas and the Wampums and the Wenatchee people. And hey, we're all on this earth together. The Creator put us all here. We may be different with our cultures, but we're here as human beings. And Indians are people. The Creator didn't make a mistake," she would say. "The Creator made no mistake when He made me," she would say. "He put me here for a reason." Well, that was the message of another Indian queen there since 1929. But to pass that history on, my uncle, my mom's brother, he was taken to Omak, Michigan. And his name was Edward Joseph, and they changed his name to Edward Walsh. And I don't know who Walsh was, what his claim to fame was, but my uncle became Edward Walsh instead of Edward Joseph. And that's how we get part of our family carried the Walsh name, because that was the name that was given to him at the mission. Now my mom's brother, Uncle Ed, he spent a lot of time over on the coast. He went back to where his grandmother was, around Snoqualmie, but he spent a lot of time on that side of the mountain. But between him and Mom, both of them, they could speak like 14 different dialects, because each one of these bands had their own dialect. They could speak Kittitas, Wenatchee Pump. Of course, they had the Chinook Jargon, but they could also speak Snoqualmie, and they spoke. My uncle could speak a lot of those coastal languages over there when they communicated back and forth. My uncle, he went and he was in the Shaker Church, and he did a lot of healing. He kind of inherited my grandmother's powers, because my grandmother was quite the healer. She was known as an Indian doctor, and people used to come around, and of course, like I say, back then, the Indians didn't go to a lot of doctors. They relied on their own, because they couldn't afford a doctor. Like I said, it wasn't cool to be Indian at that time. So they went to their own people, and like my mom said, they was given the gift of healing. And Grandma was a good healer. She healed a lot of people from the stories that I was told about different ones. And she was quite the healer. And when she passed some of those traits on to my uncle Ed, and so he was but he went with the Shaker Church, but he would do the healing, and he spent a lot of time on the coast with families over there. When they call him up, he'd go there. And back in those days, I remember when I was younger, you didn't go to doctors, and they'd come in and they'd pray for you. And there were one or two things that either happen. You either live or die, but they were going to stay with you until either one happened, and they'd follow you to your grave if you didn't make it. But they did do they were there, and they was there for the duration. And it was a lot of prayer. What do you mean? It was a lot of prayer. And growing up, when they was holding those kind of ceremonies, us kids could not make noise. We couldn't do it. When it was time, they'd give us breaks, but you only went to the bathroom when they said it was time to go to the bathroom, and usually it was a long time in between. And if you started squirming, we always used to laugh when these kids, when we started to squirm or something because we wanted to go to the bathroom and start fidgeting at the table. My mother could be sitting clear in that back corner over there, but I knew that, boy, I was going to be in trouble before I got home, because she would give me the look, and she'd be sitting back there going like this, and evil eye when nobody was going. so I knew I'd better sit still or the hammer was going to be dropped on me. I had 3 brothers. Charles was my oldest brother. There was a gentleman here, he knew my brother. There's some of them. Chuck, he was in the service, and he got taken in during the Second World War and wound up in the Army. And from what I understand, you know, my brother, he never talked about his career in the Army and stuff, but he was one of those guys that was, when I found out what all the service record stuff was and something, that he received a Silver Star while he was in there, and he was in the service. What happened is when the Indians got drafted and stuff at that time, he was in a recon platoon, and those recon platoons, and from what I understand, a lot of those recon, you heard a lot about the Navajo code talkers these days. Any other Indians that was there, they usually got attached with the Navajo code talkers, and they were part of them. But my brother was in that recon platoon, and for 7 years, my mother didn't know whether he was alive or not. And one of the neighbors, some of you might know her, I remember Bertha Morrison telling me that she used to write letters for my mom to my brother, and they wouldn't get no reply. And they wrote letters to the Department of Defense, they wrote letters to the Department of Interior, and there was you could not get any word because that was a top secret. The old Indians, I mean, they with the code talkers, and my brother was all over. I found some pictures and stuff, and I wish some of the pictures that I see now after being in Vietnam myself and seeing what he went through hell. And when he come back, like he always would tell me, he says, you know what? He says, a Purple Heart or Silver Star won't even buy you a cup of coffee. And I never knew what he was talking about, but I understood it more when I wanted to go to Vietnam as a veteran and coming back. I understand how some of those veterans that actually spent time in the field and actually went under fire, how they felt when they come back from places like that. And they didn't get the necessary treatment that they needed when they first got back. And my other brother, Bill, he would be the second to the oldest boy. He was in the service too, and he was injured severely. He had a large shell go off next to his head, and he had brain damage from that. And when he come back, he was never the same either. But he lived out in the pocket, and he actually lived here in town for a while. And my brother and them, they used to have some allotments off of Alder Street and stuff in there, and when they changed that around the college, those allotments that we had in there were bought up by the college or taken away from us when the college took all that ground in the 50s. They moved all those people out there, and those allotments that we had up there, the allotment where the rodeo grounds was at was my great-grandmother's allotment. That's where the rodeo grounds was built at. And that's why we kind of involved with the rodeo. I mean, at that time when they got that allotment from great-grandma, they took her from the rodeo grounds area, that whole allotment, that whole area was her allotment, and they moved her over onto Water Street on 11th and Water, and then from there, she passed away and she was buried. We had a family cemetery that was located in the Catholic cemetery, and she was buried out there and not at the cemetery up at the ranch. The Catholic cemetery that we had there was fenced off, and back in 1966, when the county owned that piece of land at that time, and they gave it to the Catholic Church. And when the Catholic Church got it, they went in and they leveled that ground and they pushed over that cemetery of ours. And it had a woven wire fence around it. And when I found it, it was June of 1966, before I graduated. I was in school one day, and for some reason, I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was right after lunch, and I was in Mr. Trainer's history class. And that had to be, I liked Mr. Trainer, but he was, right after lunch, a history class with him would just put you to sleep. Because he loved dates, he memorized date, but I went into that class, and something in my spirit says, you need to leave and you need to go to the cemetery. And I thought, why would I go to the cemetery? My inner voice was telling me you need to go to the cemetery. So I went out to the parking lot and I skipped school and I drove out to the Catholic cemetery. And my dad was buried out there too, so I thought, well, maybe I was supposed to go see him. But I got out there just in time to see a big D8 cat going through our family cemetery. And I was a young kid then, and just getting ready to graduate. I was pretty hot under the collar. It wasn't the cat driver's fault, but anyway. But then I made some calls. I called the tribe, and everybody assured me that that cemetery had been plotted, and they'd done a survey on it. And all those original stones, some of those headstones and stuff were big rocks, and some of them had some carvings on them. As before they had funeral homes and stuff. They were sitting there. They were pushed out, and at that time when I went out there and looked, they were all against the south fence, all leaning up against the fence. And when I told them, and they told me that, well, what it was is they supposedly plotted it, and they was going to put all this stuff back, and it would be back. The stones would be back. And I asked them, well, why did they do it? Because that same year, 1966, is when the Indian Repatriation Act was passed, just for that reason, to keep cemeteries from getting dug up and destroyed, because we had a lot of family cemeteries dug up, and a lot of our family members were dug up and taken to CWU, had a bunch of them. We got them, and now, over the years, we've been trying to get some of those bodies have come back. In fact, last year, we had a ceremony up at the ranch, and we buried 35 bodies that was returned to us from this area, because we made our family cemetery the main focal point to rebury those older family members and stuff so they could be in peace. And so we had a cemetery, or a ceremony last year up there, and we put 45 remains up there in a portion of our family cemetery. The last talk that I gave when I talked about this family cemetery, over the years, Mom was really upset, and one of the things she asked me to do was, and all we wanted to do is just find out where. I kept thinking I could find aerial photos or something and find where that building. You know, from the time I was a little boy, I could just go and we cleaned every Memorial Day. We went around and we cleaned all the family cemeteries. We started at the ranch, and then we'd come down and we clean the one at the Catholic cemetery. And of course, we clean my side of the family, Ida side of the family. We clean that side because they was all with the Catholic. We'd go to Cashmere and clean the cemetery at Cashmere. We would go up. There's a cemetery up at Thorpe, and we had some other ones. We cleaned all these cemeteries. You know, I took pictures. We was always taking pictures. You know, I can't find one picture of that cemetery out there at the Catholic cemetery. And I've sent out words, and we tried to ask people if they had any photographs of that before they pushed it over, because it had a woven wire fence around it. We cleaned it every year. They had to know it belonged to somebody, because we kept the weeds down in it. But anyway, the last group I talked to, there's a committee here in Ellensburg. They chose to take on that project because all we're asking for, what my concern was, is that the Catholic cemetery was starting to fill up. And Mom always wanted to go down there, and she would every Memorial Day, and she was always upset because she didn't know where to go put flowers and where to go say a prayer over the family. And all we wanted was that section just off, because I figured they was going to start planting graves, which they have. And of course, before Mom passed away, she always thought the cemetery was located where that big cross is at. They put a new cross in there on one of the roads. But it's hard to say because they leveled that, and it's hard to just tell how that land came. Of course, we was told. But we've got a group working on it. All we're asking for is to take off an area just so they don't put any more graves on top of the ones that are already there. Because there's 51 of our family members buried there. Captain Winwhite, great-grandma, I don't know, there was a picture of her great-grandma. So I was the youngest of that family out of the, when I come along, I was the baby of the family. In fact, I was a surprise to my mother. When my mother met my dad, she was past childbearing age. And because I came along, she always told me that the reason I was born was to take care of her. And you know, through the years, I didn't realize what I was doing when I promised her that I would. But I did my best to do what I had to do and do the things she asked me to do, and that was pass on our heritage to her. And now we're going any farther, I'd like to introduce my son Tony, who walked in late back there. Some of you know he's on the city council. He's my politician. So we can get into politics. And my daughter Sia, and some of my grandkids back here. So just want to acknowledge him. And my two cousins, if they want to stand up. They're off of that side of the family. Actually, their family would actually from our too. They were from this area up here, and they got moved to the reservation. Their family, part of them now lived in the White Swan area. That's where they were when they were moving down there. They moved down in that area. I guess I don't know. I'm kind of jumping around because I got sidetracked on the road. My mom and them, they were just, to give you an idea, when Mom married into the Nason family, there was two old ladies there. One was blind, and then Charlie Nason's wife was actually the daughter to Chief Owhi. And Chief Owhi was the one that signed the Treaty of 1855. And Mom, these old ladies, and see, Mom wasn't really a Nason. She married into the Nason family. And Charlie Nason had a pretty good family himself. But anyway, the two old ladies, the one old lady that was there was blind. And so somebody always had to stay back with her because she was blind when everybody went out to dig roots and went fishing. This time of year, I can tell you right now, this time of year, Mom was just a fanatic about it. All your spring cleaning had to be done before now. And she'd clean the house, and we'd go through everything, and she'd clean that house up, and then we was packing up and going to the lower Columbia, and at that time, Celilo Falls. We would be camped in Celilo Falls, because by the time now, if you remember, your food supply was running low, and your main source of food was dry fish. And so, my mom and all of them, they'd always go to Celilo Falls for that early spring run, because it was a long winter. You'd probably have food. And you're probably tired. You probably ate everything you put up for the year, and so you was needing some fresh food, fresh salmon, and that was where they would go. And you dig roots along the way. So, because they moved around, see, when they gave each one of these Indians allotment, before they did that, what they did is they took each Indian, and before they did the Homestead Act, they did a census, they found out how many Indians there were, and they gave each Indian 160 acres. That was their allotment. And then they gave so much more land over and above that for supposed the future generations. It was supposed to take care of our grandkids and stuff like that. And then what they did is they said, we got all this land mass, all the rest of this is excess land, so we're going to open it up to homesteaders. And what they failed to realize is that Indians they traveled. At that time, they were travelers. They didn't stay in one place. They followed the food. They followed the seasons. And most of these people, when they moved out, they wouldn't take their teepee poles with them and stuff. It was too much to travel. They took a horse maybe, and sometimes they didn't do that. They walked. And then their mode of transportation was walking. And they traveled. You would be surprised how much those people traveled. But they did. They covered ground. And when they left their allotments, they may leave their teepee poles standing there. Well, when the homesteaders come in, not all of them realized that ground was taken or was an allotment. They might have seen some teepee poles there. They probably wonder who piled them there. They must have just piled them there for us. So they came and they settled on that ground. Well, when the Indians came back, their allotments were settled on. They knew they were not going to get the thing back, those allotments back in a court of law or something like that, because they couldn't speak English. They wasn't going to go to court over it. And Mom says, at that time there was a lot of land. We just move over to the next hill. You take our teepee and set up camp there. So they lost their allotments, a lot of our mainland. And the only reason I think we never lost the allotments in the Nana was because that old lady was blind, and every time they left, there was somebody there. And they were living there. And so, but we did lose some of those allotments. One of the family members we had, she was an old lady that lived across the creek from us. Some of you will know, Clem will know, we know that as the old Blacker place, but I'm forgetting now the name of the old lady that was family, and she was buried at the Catholic Cemetery. She owned that land, that was her allotment across there. And when she died at that time, back in those years, the guy that was made, he was a lawyer. Mom always said he was a crooked guy. And because he done a number of things, his mom said he was crooked. And he became the executor of the will when that old lady died. And guess who got the allotment? He ended up with the land. And so that part of that family, that allotment was taken off. He also wound up with part of the water right that we had for our place, because Grandpa was getting ready to go fishing. He was going to be gone. And this lawyer come over and asked me, he says, hey, I'll give you $50 because I need to use some of your water while you're gone. And Grandpa thought, $50, that's a good deal. I mean, back in those days, $50 was a lot of money. He says, sure, I can do it. I'm going down to the river to go fishing. I got something to go on. So he took the $50. What he didn't realize is when he come back, that guy went down and filed in the court bill and said he bought that water right, and they made it stick. And technically, back then, if the Department of Interior was doing their job, that water should have never been transferred off that trust land, because it went with the land. So you get into these water rights things. I don't think there's any two issues in Indian history that will create more friction between the whites and the Indians, and that's hunting rights, hunting and fishing rights, and water rights stuff. I mean, it still goes on, the fight goes on, and I think as long as they can keep us all on, what they don't realize is, I think, I've told people, and I worked on different things, that, hey, they don't realize some things. The only thing that's protecting some of those water rights are some of those treaties, because if the guys in charge or some of our so-called leaders had their way, it would become United Nations property, and you wouldn't have any water rights either. Because the only thing that protects it is those treaties. Some people don't agree with me, but I went to enough meetings before I retired out of the Department of Agriculture on water stuff to know that that's a fact. But I think the message that I want to convey is, hey, Indians are humans just like everybody else. We got our weaknesses and we got our strengths. And I think some of us had some pretty good strengths if they just listened. You look at things differently. I think you can look at resources. That's why I went in the Department of Agriculture, because I wanted to go into resources, and I looked at resources a little differently. And I worked with a lot of landowners here doing that. And I think we solved a lot of problems just because we came at it at a different point of view, and they were willing to listen, and I think they was happy with the outcome when we got done. And we killed two birds with one stone. We got our fish things put in, and we got fish coming back, and we can see the results of it. And I always maintain that if we would work together, we have the ability as people to solve some of our problems. Quit relying on the federal government to do it. Take a look at the Indian tribes. The federal government declared us Indians as wards in the court, and they were going to take care of us. Well, all you got to do is travel to some of the reservations. I know a lot of people think us Indians are rich because we got casinos. We got all this stuff. I'll tell you what, the average Indian, they're getting by on nothing. Because all that money, the Department of Interior has got a big budget. You look at that budget, but that money's not getting out to individual families and stuff. It's being taken off at the top. It's like, it's just like when they set up the building, they promised us, okay, we're gonna give you this land because we want to make farmers out of you. We're gonna put irrigation systems on it. We're gonna do this so you can farm. But when you went in to go as an Indian, when I came back from the service, I couldn't get a loan to go farm. So I went to FHA, which FHA was supposed to be, if you couldn't get a loan anywhere else, the FHA was supposed to help farm. They wouldn't loan us any. That's why here recently you've seen a great big settlement where they had to pay the tribes all this money because the blacks sued them and all this stuff, because we were denied cost share funding. We was denied FHA loans and stuff. When theoretically they were supposed to be available to us. We wasn't asking for a handout. I was not asking for a handout when I come back from the service. I wanted to farm the ranch. Basically, that's all I knew how to do. When I come back from Vietnam and wanted to get a job, I interviewed a number of people, or they interviewed me. And the first thing they asked me, and they found out I was in the infantry, they said, "Sorry, we don't have a job for you because what did you do in the infantry?" I packed a rifle. I shot at people. I mean, that was my training. And they said, "Well, you have no experience." I said, "How could I have experience? I was drafted 2 weeks out of high school. I got my draft notice. And I was beaten to Uncle Sam's tomb by October. By March, I was in Vietnam. That's how fast we went through the system. The only person that would take me on was Larry Douglas with the Department of Natural Resources. And I worked with Larry he hired me as a crew foreman to run the fire crews for the DNR. He says, "I need a good drill sergeant, and I need a babysitter because the DNR can hire 16-year-old kids to work in the woods during the summer on fire crews and stuff." He says, "I need somebody that will do it, and I'm willing to give you a chance." And Larry gave me that chance. So because of that, I found employment. And I went from there to, and while I was working with the DNR, the Department of Agriculture got a hold of me because one of my cousins from the Caldwell Reservation, he called me up and says, "Hey, they got a new program out and we want to put you in it." And so I went over for the interview and they said, "Yes, we want to take you," but they went and asked me if I could go to work right then and there. And I said no, because I made an agreement with Larry Douglas that I would complete the fire season, and I said that was my word. So I says, "If you will want to hire me on, I can't come to work until after October." And they held the job open for me until October, and I quit the DNR, went to work for the Department of Agriculture, and I worked with them. And then things changed, and I had to quit that, and I got into the Forest Service back into firefighting again, and I spent 17 years with them, and then I went back over to the Soil Conservation Service and worked with them. So I kind of bounced around, but that was my career as far as the USDA. I don't know how long this is supposed to go. Some of this, I started to tell you that. I was going to point back, if you look afterwards and you get to go back in the back corner, there's two of Mom's dresses. The dress on the right, I started to tell you, I got sidetracked on that, with Owhi's daughter, her wife was an Owhi, and my grandmother, don't get confused. Anyway, those old ladies, they had it. When Mom was taking care of them, they told Mom, "Okay, our kids are going to grow up and they're not going to take care of this stuff." But what they wanted was somebody that would keep this family history in our family history's oil and take care of this stuff and pass it down to the next generation and keep passing it down. Because my mom took care of them and whatnot, they gave my mother the home place up there, but they passed all that stuff down to my mom. And that dress back there in the right-hand corner, according to Mom, was worn by Owhi's daughter, at the signing of the treaty in 1855. It's been in the family since then, and it's been passed down through the years. There was a Indian musician. The last time she loaned it out to somebody, they took it back. He played back in New York, I think it was. And when he brought it back, Mom was very fussy about it when she took care of it, and just because she used it for special occasions, and buckskin tends to get dirty fast, so she was really fussy on how she took care of that stuff. But when he brought it back, she was kind of upset because they didn't really take care of it, so she never did loan it out after that. And we kind of used it, and I didn't know, it's one of those things, there's a lot of history in that dress. I mean, it just tells our history, our family side of the story. And so we put, and then the other dress was made by one of my cousins or somebody, and so it's been passed down through the years. So I had it put in here at the museum just to try and protect it, to pass it on, because I'm not sure how things are going to go. Trying to pass it down and who should get it and who's going to take care of it. Actually, all the baskets you see in the center there that are built, those baskets were made by the Snoqualmies, on the Snoqualmie side of the family. And what Mom and them would say is the family over in the north, or around Falls City, they would make baskets and stuff, because that's where all the cedar roots and all that stuff was really located. And the Indians on this side, they would hunt, fish, dig roots, and then in the fall of the year, they'd get together and come over here, and you'd trade baskets for food. And we'd get baskets with roots, and maybe they'd fill them with cedar root and stuff so you could make baskets too. But all of those baskets that Mom had were made by her aunts that lived in Falls City. And that's why they're a Snoqualmie style basket, because they were Snoqualmie. And so some of the other stuff, the beaded bags and stuff, were all made by either great-grandma, grandma, and a few were made by Mom. She used to do a lot of beading. That's how she traded. She did a lot of gloves. I think I brought some. Some of the things she did was she made gloves. Some of them were work gloves. She used to make gloves for the guys that worked on those stationary balers and stuff, and some of the people who run around with my brother, she'd make buckskin gloves for them because of buckskin gilbert. She made a number of beaded gloves like these, and she made them from different ones. Like I remember she made a set for Aunt McHugh, and she made some for different ones. She used to make gloves, and she usually traded beadwork for food. At that time, she didn't have a lot of money, but that's how she would get her food when they started taking money. She would beat, and she used to tan all of her own buckskin. She tanned all her own hides, and she hand tanned them, and then she would do the beating. Usually during the winter months, she did a lot of beating. She traded beating. These were a couple sets of gloves that she made all the time, and then I took my second wife and taken some of the scraps of buckskin that my mother had hand tanned that she had, and she was beating this doll. She was trying to make a replica of that dress back there, only in a smaller version with the scraps of some of the buckskin that my mom had hand tanned. She didn't get the back finished because that back would look kind of like the front, I think. But this was her carving. She was kind of an artist. She liked doing carved stuff, and she was trying to make a doll of my mom. This was some of my mom's hair that she took. My mom had given it to her, and she made a little. This is one of the last pictures, I think, or a picture that somebody had taken and given to his mom up close. They took the picture up close. I think they were planning on doing some painting or something. They wanted a real close up of her. And that's my mom. This is a picture of that old lady I was telling my mom took care of, was blind. Her name was Cecilia Sam. And this picture here was actually taken for the promotion of the Ellensburg Rodeo in 1929. And it was a picture of my oldest sister Helen and my next oldest Minnie when they were rodeo queen and rodeo princess. And I believe it was taken from the looks of the creek and stuff, it was taken out of the ranch somewhere along the Nana Creek. And then I put some of these, when I did a lot of talks and stuff in schools, and when I went to schools, instead of having the kids have them, because kids like to put their fingers and stuff on pictures and stuff, I printed some of these pictures out and had them laminated so I could pass them around, and I could probably pass these around, but just this picture right here is a picture of great-great-grandma when she was at the rodeo ground, or when she was at her allotment at the rodeo ground. And then this picture right here is the actual, well, the teepee and stuff up at the Nana where they lived. That was the original house they had. It was like a log house. But we got burnt out up there twice. In fact, when that Nana Creek burned out back during this time, it burned out this original log house and stuff. And a lot of our Indian brigade and stuff was lost at that time. We lost all of our horse riding gear, all of our saddles, all the Indian saddles and stuff were lost in that fire. And Mom and them weren't home at that time. They were actually up at Skookum Mountain up in Tianaway picking huckleberries. It was late in the season. And there was a fire up there that started down below like Thomas Road and come up through that creek drainage and burned that whole creek drainage. That's what I was worried about when they had that Taylor Ridge fire and even the fire over to the east of us, was that if it ever got into that Nanum drainage, we got about 50 years worth of dead and down cottonwoods, and the brush is so thick you can't walk through it. If we ever get a fire in there, they're not going to stop them until it burns clear up to the pit into the Nanum. So that's what had me worried during those fires. This is right here is a picture of my Uncle Ed. He was a big man. He used to log. He did a lot of logging over to the Maumee around North Bend and stuff. And this was a picture of my mom and great-grandma and my youngest sister Joanne. And then this picture is Mom, my mother, and her sister-in-law, Uncle Ed's wife, Lucy. And then this picture here is a picture of Mom's first husband, John Nason. And then this is his brother-in-law that they used to live out at Thorpe. That was his, that's where he lived. And this is Grandma, where her house was located over Cook Canyon. And then this is Grandma and Grandpa. This is who I'm named after. This is Billy Peters here. So I can kind of pass these around and rip them beside me so you can kind of look at them, just pass them around. Okay, this picture here was actually given to me by, I didn't have a copy of this picture, but Grace Elkins was kind enough to give it to me. It came out of Grace's collection. This is a picture of great-grandma's house, and this is what the rodeo grounds looked like before they built the rodeo grounds. And it actually, that teepee is sitting right about, if you look at it and look at where that building is, about where the Indian village is located at today. That's where they just kept moving around the field, but she had that whole piece in there because it was a full allotment. And but that's kind of what that's where she lived. It was, at that time they didn't have a lot of canvas. Her teepee was made out of a lot of hides, elk hides and stuff like that, as opposed to canvas. They had just round floors. this little piece here, my two cousins in the back, Vichy, just before my mother passed away. Vicky's mom made Gabriel's mom. She come up this time of year when we were root digging. She brought that to my mother. So this is the work of my cousin Vicky, her mother. So I think tonight I should give this back since you showed up. Come up here, Vicky. This is how our people did stuff. This was passed down by her mother to my mom. Now I'm passing it back to her family for her to take. This was just a necklace that she had made in a little basket. Her mother's name was Dolly. And she made small baskets and did this to probably sell, make extra money and gas money or something. And she made this and gave it to my mom just before Mom passed away. She showed up one day to dig roots, and she brought this up and gave it to Mom, put it around her neck. Because it must have been meant to be that she showed up tonight, and it's in my heart that I'm going to pass this back to her family.
I want to thank my brother today for this time. Mima Tima, Wanikshash Twix. My name is Twix. It's given to me by my grandma, his mother. My mother and I used to go over to gather cedar over by Wenatchee, up there, all the way into Canada, over to Hood River. And like you heard, there were no boundaries for us. When it was that time of the year we traveled, we went. And we always looked forward to seeing one another. And every time we came and we parted, Alan's mother would stand on the porch and cry, sob, with a broken heart. And we'd leave, and I never did ask my mom about it, what it meant. Now I know. Because I think about my brother here every day, up here in Nanham, and our family history at Icicle. And the names, the places, embedded in our hearts forever. And now I understand. When somebody gives you something, you take care of it. And at the right time, you return it to that family. As I seen my mother with her knives, grinding stones that were given to her by her aunt. And when my mother died, I returned them to my cousins. The panai, the grinder. And I haven't made any cedar baskets in many years because it's hard work. And when I feel the cedar, it reminds me of my mother and I cry. I have a lot of cedar at home that I can't take care of to this day. Maybe someday I will. I'm very thankful for this gift today. Awi kuklaw kun minaimo.
She had an aunt, her mother's name was Dolly, and she had an aunt whose name was Myrtle. And every time, this time of year, Myrtle would always show up because it was fishing time down in Shiloh, and she'd always come up and get Mom and bring some up. But I'm going to tell you a story. Myrtle always told me a story from the time that she was a little girl. She was with my grandmother, and they went over to Wenatchee, up the icicle. They were coming back. It was late in the year. They had to travel up over the top of coming up over Mission Ridge. They hit a storm, real big storm. It started snowing. At that time, I was still Mom. They had one horse. They was leading the horse that had baskets on it. They'd been up there getting late huckleberries up on the north end, up in Lake Wenatchee or somewhere, but they had to come back. They were coming back. They hit this storm. It started snowing and raining, and Mom said it was cold. And Myrtle said it was really cold, and she was a little girl, and she kept crying around, and Grandma kept telling her, "Shut up and toughen up." She said all I could do was toughen up, and I'd cry a little bit more, and she'd go, and she said it was getting dark, and at that time there was no roads. No trail. You had to know where the trails were, and the timber was thick up there. And they rode through those trees coming down. Myrtle says, I couldn't remember. Anyway, they come down somewhere, and she said, I went in there, and Myrtle would always come and get me, because she was telling me the story. She was always with me. She said, Grandma took me down, took me through somewhere. We went in, and it was somewhere up there around Liberty. And I've traveled that country too, and I've been looking for it. She says, Grandma went through the brush and took her in, and they went into a cave. And this cave was big enough that you could ride your horses in. When you rode your horses in there, the first part of the cave, they said, was big enough they could take their horses in, and somebody had cut a whole bunch of grass, and they had it all piled like a haystack, and you could feed your horses in there. And then she took them back to the back part in another big cave. And Myrtle was always looking for it as a little girl, because all she remembered, she says, oh, that cave was full of baskets, big baskets, all baskets. They were all sitting around, and they all had cedar roots and stuff over them, and they were full of food. They had roots, dried berries, dried fish, different stuff. And she went over, and there was a pounding rock in there where they were good. They had a little place for a fire. She'd build a little fire. Myrtle would know that. Well, Myrtle, every time she'd come up, she'd always get me, she says, come on, we gotta go look for that cave. I want to see if I was dreaming or if there was a cave or baskets there. I told her, I said, Myrtle, you know, I've been working with the Forest Service down. I've been working at, and I've hoofed all over that country up there. And I've never found a cave like it. I found some caves. But you know, I keep looking for that because I know it's probably up there somewhere. It's gotta be, but they put their buildings. I brought this here. This was when I was a little boy. I was growing up. This set of bones here was made by my grandpa, Billy Peters, for me to learn how to play stick game. And here's the stick game player, most of you guys. He used to play stick game with the rodeo village all the time. So he knows how to play stick game. But he'd always put his money on them. It seemed like he was always on the winning side. Oh. Les Knudsen, for those of you who don't know, used to be the Indian director for quite a while during the Ellensburg Rodeo back in the 60s. And he was pretty well liked by a lot of our tribal elders and stuff, because he did work with them. And we see him quite a bit. He still comes around and visits during rodeo time at the village with some of the elders that are still there. A lot of our elders that I know are gone. I guess I'll tell one more story about Grandpa. When I was a little boy, this barely big ago, I remember Grandpa used to love. It was after Grandma had passed away, and he was over at the ranch, and he would come over to the ranch, but he'd always drive back over to Cook Creek. At that time, that allotment, the allotment's right there where you go up, and you turn, either go to Coleman or you turn to Cook Creek, and you turn to Cook Creek, and it runs from, the allotment ran from I don't know whether that's Cook Creek Road that runs there up to the T, what do you call it? And then it ran over to Clock and Pass, over to the Little Caribou, and then it went up on that hill, and you'll see where that the house and stuff is still there. It's getting run down and starting to fall down. The little hill. But Grandpa used to like to go over there. Back when I was a little kid, there was jackrabbits running around everywhere. I mean, every sagebrush had a jackrabbit behind it, I think. But Grandpa used to get up early in the morning. He had a little 410 shotgun. I'm not sure whether he's got it in that picture or not. And he used to like to go over there, drive over there early in the morning, get up just before daybreak, drive over to the whole place, and then he'd go hunt his jackrabbit. He'd usually get a jackrabbit, then he'd come back home and fix it in his little house. That was his breakfast. He'd fix his jackrabbit. But Grandpa, he'd take me around, and he took me around when I was small, and I went with him, and he drove me up that Clocken Road, and got me up on top. There's that ridge going out. It's kind of a salt ridge, just looking down into the Little Caribou, and down into where the racetrack and where that area was there at. And he had me stand around, and at that time, that elk herd was pretty big. We used to winter about 400 head elk at our ranch in the Manor. They went out, but he told me, he took me up there, and he told me, he says, take a look. He's telling me, little kid, he said, look around the valley. You could look across, and you could see, on a good day, you could see over towards the Tatum and up the Monash Valley. And this is what he was telling me. He said, take around a look. He says, look at the animals, see what you see. He says, when I was a boy growing up, he says, those animals were, he says, now that you're a little boy, he says, you're only going to see half of what I seen when I was growing up. And then he told me, he says, your kids will only see less than half of what you're seeing today in those animals. He said, things are going to come. And then he says, he walked me out on that ridge, and it was that basalt rock. And I was a little boy, and he showed me these rocks, and he took me out there. And if you walk out there now, if you drive up the Clock and Pass Road, you get up there. They got a road built down. It went down along that draw that was up on the rock. And when we went out on that creek, if you look up there, there's a Turner house set up, and a big double wide. But Grandpa told me at that time there was nothing out there except rock, rattlesnakes, and jackrabbits. But he said, before you go, he says, you're going to see a house right here. And I said, Grandpa, how are they going to get water? He said, oh, they're going to get water. And he says, there's going to be a house here. And then he took me around, and he drove me across the valley over on the Umtana Ridge. Walked down on the Umtana Ridge. Had me look north, toward the Wenatchee country. He said, that's your home place up there. He said, take a look at this valley. He says, you're going to see, and he says, you're going to see houses up here. Same kind of deal. Out there, how are you going to get water? You know they'll put water, you're going to get water up there. But he says, what you're going to see is, he says, when you see this valley filling up, there's going to come a time when this valley is going to fill up. You're going to see houses all over it. I kind of see that now when we come off of that ridge at night. I see lights where I've never seen lights before. But it's filling up. But he told me, he said, when you see this valley fill up, he says, you're going to fall upon hard times. He said the times are going to get hard and really hard. He says, you better know what your foods are, your traditional foods. He says, you need to be around and tell your young kids, because he says by the time your kids grow up, they won't know what your traditional foods are. They won't know how to find them. They won't know what they are. And they won't even know how to fix them or eat them. He says, you tell them. He says, you better learn how to do that. He says, once you see this valley fill up, he says, you're going to see it, and those hard times will start coming. He says, they're going to get worse. He says, then you will see the end come. And I used to think he was crazy. And then now, when I get older, I'm thinking, you know what? He knew something I didn't know. But he used to tell that to me all the time, and my mom and him used to tell me, says, hey, you got good times now. But he says, you better be prepared so you can make it through the hard times. So you don't take anything for granted for today, you just live today, but you better be prepared for the next day. And so they always, this is part of our deal, we try to pass that down, and we try to tell that story to our young kids. I guess the last thing I would leave with is, and it's still a burden on my heart, and I know the state's pretty proud that they passed the pot law, the marijuana law. But all I want to say to the people, and I think people need to wake up, I think in the long run it's going to come back to bite us right in the butt. Because all you have to do is go on a reservation. And I've seen the heartache that some of my family members have to live with people on drugs, and it started out with marijuana. Oh, it's just a joint here and a joint here, and then it led to something else. But I can tell you right now, give you 5 generations, and your guys, at least all the families out there are going to have a bunch of kids and family thing. I think it's going to come back and bite us really bad. And I just say that because I think that's one of the things that Grandpa was trying to tell me, the hard times are going to come, those kind of things are going to come. Our families are deteriorating, and part of it is because of drugs, alcohol. Our reservations are riddled with it. All you have to do is see what has happened on the reservation. And if you're thinking the federal government's going to help you, forget it, because they haven't helped us. I mean, the real people, the people that, you know, we have lives too, but I'm passing that on, I think, just to say it, because I was thinking about it the last few days. It's been on my heart, so I must have been meant to say it. But that's something that Grandpa used to kind of talk about. And he told me, he says, tell your kids, and to stay away. And of course, alcohol has always been a big problem for the Indian people. And we've dealt with it all of our lives, and that was something we've had to deal with in our families. Our family had an alcohol problem, and we've dealt with it. And they're not easy to, it's a disease. And I think just for those of you, my words are, beware of this pot law. It's got me concerned how it's going to affect our people. And I know already how it's affecting our Indian people. I see it on our reservations, and it's not a pretty sight. I guess with that, I'll close.